There we go.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. We're going to wait about 30 seconds to a minute just to make sure that everybody has a chance to log in, and then we will get started. Okay, welcome everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on simplifying e-billing and reducing revenue leakage. My name is Brad Blickstein. I'm the CEO of the Blickstein Group, and I will be your host and moderator today. Also, we have with us Rick Hellers from ScanLogic and Michael Rosenberg, managing partner of ROIG Law Firm. I'd like just to start briefly, Rick, and then Michael, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background in legal tech and your background in legal billing and legal finance? Rick?
Yeah, hey, everybody. Glad to be with you. So in 1979, I went to work for my first law firm. And, if you think about that, that was pre-computers, pre-automation. I quickly learned that billing for law firms is incredibly complicated. And in the 4+ decades that I've been doing this, it's only gotten more complicated. Computers have helped, but at the same time, the volume's increased. The demands, the requirements, the complexity has just increased every day, every year, so on and so forth. And I've spent my entire adult life inside of law firms and helping law firms around the world, and having a great time and lots of fun helping law firms conquer the e-billing crisis.
Thanks, Rick. I'm Michael Rosenberg. I'm the managing partner of ROIG Lawyers, where I am a minority-owned law firm based out of Florida, specializing in commercial litigation and insurance defense. And I've been, I guess I've been involved in legal tech for many years at this point. I don't know, I've lost track. But as the managing partner, I felt it was always my duty and obligation to understand this industry, not only the law industry, but the technology industry and where the two converge, and really try to bring to the firm the right pieces of technology to assist with our platform and assist with our day-to-day. So not only the practice of law, but the actual practice of the practice and making sure things run smoothly. And that's where ultimately technology comes into play and assists us with, maybe it's e-filing or maybe it's e-billing, but there's a lot of technology that comes into law firms now.
Great. Thanks, guys. So, Rick, you mentioned a phrase that we've bandied about a lot, the e-billing crisis. And, we've worked together and we've identified really 4 elements of the e-billing crisis. And I'll preview those for everybody quickly, because those will basically serve as our agenda for today. And then we're going to spend the rest of our time sort of talking about each of those elements of the crisis and what law firms can do about it. So the first is too many different client-side e-billing products to interface with. We're talking about the TimeMetrixes, the Team Connects, the Honest of the world. There's many of them. And if you have multiple clients, as most firms do, you probably do multiple systems. 2, each of those clients has their own outside counsel guidelines, and it's hard to harmonize those. Everyone wants different information. 3 is sometimes these systems are not as good as we'd like them to be about providing actionable feedback. So when something goes wrong in the process, sometimes they're not always, it's hard to figure out what that is and what we can do about it. And 4th, most clients have some sort of an appeal process if they reject a bill or kick out part of a bill. But that can be a difficult process to understand, identify, and work through. So that's what we will be talking about today. That is our agenda. But let's start with, and I'm going to sort of start with you, Rick, and let's start with this topic about there being so many products to which law firms have to submit their e-bills. Can you just talk a little bit about why this is more painful than it might seem at first blush?
Yeah, I mean, it's painful, it's complicated, it's frustrating. And even for firms that are doing it reasonably well, it's more of an art than a science. The individual specialization to be able to know how to interact with one platform doesn't carry forward over to another platform. So law firms are faced with the tough decision of having to go out and acquire the talent, hire the people that know how to interface and work with time metrics, and that person may or may not know how to work with Counsel Link or the next platform. They're very complicated, complicated to use, and the reason I think we call it a crisis is no one's really happy. The law firms aren't happy, the lawyers aren't happy, the clients aren't happy, right? There's a lot of confusion as to where the frustration lies, and yet we believe the frustration lies with what we call the e-billing portals or the gateways themselves, and the lack of uniformity.
All right. So,
You know,
Michael, Rick just said that the clients are frustrated and unhappy. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, so first off, let me just say it. So Rick calls it a crisis. I might call it more of a challenge. Sort of the same thing, but depending how you want to say it. From the client, the feedback that we get from the clients is a challenge, that's for sure. I mean, certainly, when we submit our bills, from the law firm, and we have an issue, and we go to the client. A lot of the times, the information we get back from the client is, I don't really know the system. I'm not sure who you're supposed to talk to. Talk to the vendor. The vendor can assist you. And then, frankly, when you talk to the vendor, like, no, you got to talk to the client. So there's a lot of, not that I don't think it's intentional finger pointing. I think it's just nobody knows who's necessarily responsible for the issues, and issues come up. I mean, when we're dealing, as Rick mentioned, we're dealing with multiple technology platforms to do the same thing. At the end of the day, I'm trying to submit my bill for the work I've done to my client and get paid for it. But the process that we go through is different every single time with every single client. And yes, there's some similarity. Some of them might be on the same billing systems, but even within the same billing systems, the rules or the guidelines are never the same. So there is a need for standardization and uniformity. And I think that's everybody goes back to, my mind, the days of oh, well, we have now the leads format. The leads format is the way that the bill should be submitted. And that's all well and good. But that's just putting your bill in rows and columns. After that happens, there's a lot of steps that have to go along with that.
Yeah, that's like a new billing format, if you will, right? And it doesn't necessarily allow what you're billing to conform with the compliance requirements and what's been agreed to in the outside counsel guidelines, which in and of itself is incredibly complex and confusing to interpret and then try to bill it correctly. So I talk to law firms every day all over the world, and the number one thing I hear on this topic is we're really trying really hard, but no matter how hard we try, we can't get it right, and it's frustrating because we want to get it right.
Yeah. So let's dig a little deeper into outside counsel guidelines, Rick, right? Because we covered sort of we started by covering almost the basic blocking and tackling of just interfacing with these systems. And while the leads format does a pretty good job, at least in making sure that there's a standard file format, even if they're all kind of different processes for uploading and working with the systems. The UTBMS codes, which are theoretically supposed to do the same thing by creating a standard set of outside counsel guidelines, has really largely failed, right? I mean, for the most part, there is no standard set of outside counsel guidelines. At least most clients have bastardized that a little bit. Usually they'll take the UTBMS codes and say, great, those are great, here's 5 more. And, something something close to a standard is by definition not a standard. So Rick, can you talk a little bit more about where this problem is and why it's such a huge issue for a lot of firms, enough of an issue for you to use the term crisis?
Yeah, again, it's everyone's trying real hard, but try as you might, it's nearly impossible to get it right. I reminisce about my early days in law firms when, the hardest part was just getting the lawyers to review the pre-bills, mark them up, make the changes, and send the bills out. That's still hard, but now we have a whole nother layer on it, right? The other layer is you've got to be in compliance with a multi-page document. And that multi-page document's outside counsel guidelines. And in some cases, I mean, we've seen OCGs that are dozens and pages long and hard to even understand and interpret the rules that you're being asked to follow. And the modern day systems for billing clients don't incorporate that aspect of billing into it. So, if the OCG says you need to do these 12 things, and oh, by the way, do those 12 things while you're standing on your head and singing a song, it's nearly impossible to do 6 of those things, let alone the things that are even equally challenging, like a circus act. And so firms spend enormous amounts of time trying to get it right, only to fail. I've yet to talk to a firm that says, oh yeah, we've got this nailed. We prepare our bills, the lawyers review them, they mark them up, we create the lead files, we submit them, and oh gee, we get paid. No one is saying that, right? What happens is they go through that process and they don't get paid, or they don't get paid in full, or they find out something's been rejected, but then they can't figure out why it was rejected. It's a total crisis, right? And Michael, I suspect that in some cases you're calling your clients, because I hear this from law firms all the time, where the lawyer's calling the client and saying, I love working for you, I want to get paid, what can you do to help? And your client says, gee, you haven't been paid? Let me look into it. And then it just goes round and round and round in circles. So, the old adage is true, you're not going to get paid until the bill is correct. And I think everyone knows that now after years and years and years of trying to bill clients, but trying to getting the bill correct is just almost impossible.
Yeah, I'll just jump in there. That's again, it's another challenge for us. We have many clients and they all have different guidelines. We represent, Fortune 500 clients. So they all are well versed. This isn't like a mom and pop shop in Miami that are getting sued that, one time they don't know what to do and they call us. And we do that work as well. But when you're representing large clients, they're all well versed in litigation. And they want to have things standardized. But the challenge that we find is the lack of synchronicity between the different guidelines. So I could be working for one client today and then another client later in the day, and one might want me to word a particular task one way and the other one wants it worded another way. So it's either one, incumbent on me to remember, oh, client A wants it this way and client B wants it that way, or B, it's incumbent on me to go and read the guideline as I'm putting in my time entry. Well, neither of those are happening. Let's be honest. I mean, we have enough on a day-to-day basis to, of course, I generally know the guidelines, but there's no way to remember some of these guidelines. And Rick is correct. Some of them are very long, very complex. Some of them, frankly, are a little bit outdated. And, they don't recognize the reality of the litigation that's happening today and how things have evolved technology-wise. The use of email, the use of online scheduling. There are some things that just don't account for those variables. But the requirement, not only at the user level, but then ultimately in the bill submission process to make sure these bills are compliant, is just another ongoing challenge when you represent multiple companies. It just becomes very, very time consuming. I think Rick mentioned about sort of the need to have multiple people working this, and Rick was correct. Like, We want to get our bills perfect. That's my goal, right? I mean, I want to get paid, obviously. So it just has become very, very challenging to ensure that these bills are exactly the way the clients want them. It's just become an additional hurdle that we have to jump.
Yeah, let me just add, but Brad, I'm going to bring you into the conversation because you and I have talked about this, right? It's the reason that I think of it as a crisis is everything Michael said is true and real, and most firms are working really hard to do it correctly. But on the client side, when they get the phone call saying, "Why haven't you billed us? And why did you do this? And why do you do that?" I've heard you, Brad, talk about the clients are saying, "Well, just follow the guidelines and everything will be great."
Yeah, there's definitely some of that, and the bigger issue is it's more like what the clients are basically saying, and is that sounds like a you problem. Like I respect that you have I understand that you have other clients. I understand that we all have different guidelines, but like, you're billing us X hundreds or in some instances, X thousands of dollars an hour. And like, it's really not our problem that you have to spend some resources to get your, to bill us to get, and they're just not terribly sympathetic towards that particular issue. So I think that's a big factor, I think, in that, it's like, okay, well, and it's not totally unsensible, right? I mean, rates do seem high sometimes, and in some instances, they in fact are very high. And I don't know, like if I'm your client, then like I don't really care that much about your other clients. Like that's just not my problem, right? Like this is what I need. I don't really care what they need, and that's the cost of doing business with us. So,
but I think sorry, I just want to jump in there, Brad. I think we do have to distinguish though the clients who are paying in $1,000 an hour versus the $100 an hour. There should be a distinction. There should be like, I mean, certainly if you know clients that are paying $1,000 an hour, send me that list, please. I'd love to chat with them. But on a serious note, if you're getting paid $1,000 per hour for the work you're doing, you should have the resources to make sure that bill is pristine and perfect. And you should probably memorize, or you should have it up on your computer at all times to make sure your time entries are perfect. That I don't feel any sympathy for that particular person. But for those of us that are in, maybe more of the volume-based litigation that aren't getting that rate and nowhere near that rate, that's where the challenge comes in, because the law business, what people forget, it's still very, it's all human based, right? I can't use AI. I can use technology to make my job a little bit easier, but I still have to take the deposition. I still have to go to court. I still have to be the one, the person. I have to send the emails. I mean, we have ethical responsibilities. We have a lot of different things that come into it. So the technology aspect, while there is some time saving and ability to make things more efficient, at the end of the day, it's still me. It's me as the person doing the work. I'm doing it. I'm drafting the motions. I don't have AI, drafting a shell motion and then me making the change to it. I'm doing it from scratch every time. So the clients, do recognize that, but they also have to recognize the billing aspect of that is, yes, I might not put my phraseology exactly perfect each time, but I did the work. You guys saw it, you approved it, got filed. So someone's got to pay for it.
So, and making this worse, and what I found interesting over the years, and I know, Michael, you do it a lot. Your insurance defense firm largely do a lot of work with insurance companies. They, on the client side, and I've been studying a lot of department operations for a couple decades now, they often are the best at systematizing their guidelines, systematizing their processes, holding their firms accountable to staying within those guidelines. Or maybe they're the worst at it, I guess, depending on your perspective, right? But they are the most effective at doing that. So it's almost like a bit of, for firms like yours, Michael, it's become a bit of a vicious circle sometimes, where like you're working on the, and excuse me for saying it, but on the low end of the rate spectrum, because of who their clients are, what the type of work is. And on top of it, those tend to be the very clients that are best at putting pressure on their firms to stay within their guidelines. And you wind up not only getting paid a lower rate, but you get paid fewer of your hours. You get paid on fewer of your hours because they're effective at making sure that you don't. You know, so I want to move us on to the third element of the billing, of the e-billing challenge. We'll say it that way. And that's that, so there, when you do have time entries rejected or invoices rejected, you know, it's not like the client side system is like fixing them for you. It's not like they're just saying, oh, well, let us reword this entry for our firm so that they can get paid. And in fact, they don't have a reputation for being all that great about making it easy for you to do that either. And maybe it's not worth having a discussion about how intentional that is, but the fact is that that's what it is. So, you know, Rick, maybe start with you again, but can we talk about what do we do about that? Like, what do we do with the fact that even when they reject the bill, like it's like they're creating double or triple work to fix it, making it really hard to, you know, what because they don't give you great information on what to do.
Yeah, no, that it's hard to find the information. And when you find the information, for example, that says, let's just make an example. So you billed someone $1,000 and you know you get paid 900, and then trying to reconcile why you didn't get paid that $100 can take an amazing amount of time. But even before it takes that amount of time, you've got to have the expertise in terms of how to access the system and where to look. And so firms, regardless of their size, are trying to, you know, hire, trying to train e-billing specialists. And those e-billing specialists are unique to each platform because each platform is different, and the data within there is buried, you know, 5 layers deep, and you've got to have you know, a great expertise on where to find that information. Now, once you find the information, you would think, great, I know why I didn't get paid. Let me try to fix that. But then that begins yet another journey, right? Once you've even determined why you didn't get paid for something, it begins an entire another journey. And then in terms of how to appeal it or how to, you know, seek resolution so that you can get paid for it. And some firms have most firms struggle with that process. Some firms have concluded that it's not worth the effort to try to get paid for it because it's too cumbersome and burdensome. And as a result, it reduces their realization rate. And so whether you're charging big bucks or average bucks on an hourly basis, ultimately your realization rate is less than 100%. And in some cases, less than 90%, less than 80%. And that's a challenge. That's incredibly frustrating to just, you know, I can't think of too many other environments where, you know, you send someone in a bill and they decide what to pay for it. You know, thought about, you know, maybe I can do that with my electric bill. You know, that well, they charge me X and I'm going to pay them X minus 20%. And well, that's just the way it is, right? So again, that's why I think of it as a crisis. It's you know, you work so hard to prepare your bill, you work so hard to comply with the guidelines and submit it properly, and bing, bang, boom, you get paid what you get paid, and it takes time and effort to figure out why.
Yeah,
So let's table that for just a minute and stay on just the time and effort to figure out why. Because Michael, I know that's something that you guys have faced. So, you know, how do you do that? Like, what, you know, like you get the rejection notices or you get the flags, but then what, you know, like what was your process like to go from there to even like figure out what you can appeal or what you can resubmit?
it's a challenge. You know, knowledge is power, right? And the one thing that these vendors have done, again, I don't think it's necessarily intentionally, is they haven't really focused on us as the end user, the law firms. They probably have focused on who they're selling to. They're selling to a corporate institutional client, and the reporting that they give them is probably pristine and superb. But us as the person submitting the time or the entries or the bill, however you want to say it, the information that we get out of them or from them is not particularly helpful. And, you know, there's ways certainly to cull that data and try to use the data. But it has been very challenging to really report on the data in a way that we can make actionable changes, right? Because at the end of the day, I want to submit the right bill. I'm not even worried about like getting paid 100%. Yes, I want to get paid 100%, but I know some clients at the level of people who sort of are responsible for the litigation, and they get there's commentary back and forth of like the law firms aren't compliant with billing, and then they come to us and they say, well, you're not compliant with the billing guidelines. And I was like, well, what am I not compliant on? And then they're like, well, hold on, let me check. And then they go back and they come back and they say, oh, you're not on this. But if I would have had the report, I would have resolved it myself before you even had to pick up the phone and tell me that. So, sometimes you're able to get a little bit of information here and there. And also part of the challenge, frankly, is the legal products, not necessarily the billing products, but the case management, the billing software. They don't really allow us to track at a user time entry level what is the challenge with that particular entry. Yes, I could say, okay, I billed $1,000 and I only got paid 900, and that obviously I could report on and I can see that. But I can't see necessarily that it was Rick's time and it was reduced or cut because he didn't comply with this particular rule. So I think there's also a challenge here at the software side for the technology that we use on day-to-day just to create our bills. In order to solve that problem, to be able to accept that information so then we can report it back out to our attorneys and say, hey, this is what you're doing wrong. This is how you should fix it. So there's a lot of challenges happening here in this sort of gray area of lack of information on what's wrong with the bill.
So, Rick, taking a bunch of information that is buried inconsistently in reports and tools and turning that into something organized and actionable, I mean, that sounds like a job for technology, right? Is
Absolutely. 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 I mean, I don't know when, Brad, you might remember this, when the term dashboard came into play with law firms, right? Everyone wanted a dashboard in terms of their data. And so what we've done at ScanLogic is we've built a unified dashboard so that rather than having to log into multiple e-billing platforms, you're simply logging into our system and you're seeing all of the information that you otherwise would have to go find in the various platforms. You're seeing it all in one place. It's actionable. It's organized. In some cases, we've even changed the description of the item because the descriptions that were being used in the platforms were different and not very not very understandable, right? And so the ability to just simply look in one place for every e-bill that you've issued, I think is incredibly powerful. And then to be able to have the right level of data for it and be able to take action on it is even more powerful.
Right.
I think Rick is being too humble. The data that they are providing and able to provide and put it in a dashboard is probably the best way you could say it. To be able to call that data and see it in a unified way that's organized and actionable to us is invaluable. I mean, that to me is like the secret sauce I think that they have figured out. I wish I would have figured it out, but I didn't. But they figured out how to do it. And that, as a end user of Rick's product, which I don't think I even said, and maybe we shouldn't have said or weren't going to say, I don't know, but I do use Rick's product, and I think it's fantastic. But that to me is one of the most important points of it is having access to all the e-billing data without having to go into multiple platforms with multiple logins and multiple different ways to access the information, to take it and funnel it all down and us to be able to see it and say, oh, okay, this is what we should be doing. No problem. And I agree with Rick's statement where he was saying the description that is being used is not descriptive enough. I agree. Where Rick looks at it and says, oh, wait a minute, this is the actual rule. Sometimes like, oh, light goes off, like, oh, I don't know why I wrote it that way. I didn't even realize that was the rule that they're applying. okay, here's the right way to word this entry. Boom, gets paid. So that to me is invaluable.
So before we move on to our fourth and final topic for today, I just want to remind the audience that we have left a couple minutes for questions at the end. So please feel free to use the Q&A module at the bottom of Zoom. I think we all know how to use Zoom webinar by now, and type in your questions, and I'll pose them to Rick and Michael on your behalf. So Rick, you mentioned a few minutes ago the difficulty in the appeal process, but this time, Michael, I want to start with you this time and talk about that a little bit. I mean, it's one thing to figure out where the problems in the bill are, but that's really only step one in getting in closing that revenue gap between what the firm has agreed to pay and what you believe the firm should pay. So, what's that process like?
Well, again, my word, challenge. It's a challenge. I use the word crisis in terms of litigation crisis in Florida, right? So for us, there's a litigation crisis in Florida. Yes, we're seeing the numbers starting to decrease, but the volume of litigation is still there, and the activities that need to be done in a file are still there. That's what I need to focus on, and my entire team needs, not just the attorneys, the legal assistants, the paralegals, the support team, the administrative team, the operations team. We have to focus on the work. We shouldn't be focused necessarily on the billing, and we shouldn't be focused necessarily on the appeal. But in order to get an appeal, through the system, it requires a lot of coordination. It requires the coordination of the finance team. It may require a coordination of the operations team, and then requires coordination with the end user. Might be the attorney, might be the legal system, might be the paralegal, I don't know who necessarily it is. I mean, obviously billing would know. But we need to go back to them and we need to say, well, this was paid or reduced or not paid because of this particular reason. Could you assist us with it? It's requiring a lot of extra work that, frankly, we don't have the time for. I'm focusing on my clients. I'm focusing on the work. I'm trying to, win my cases at the end of the day or get the best result I can for my clients. I don't really have the time to take a meeting with my billing team and have them question me on this particular time entry. Why did it get paid, or why didn't it get paid, or did I word it properly? I don't have time for that. And that really is, it becomes a challenge. It becomes a challenge for us to spend the time to focus on it and decide whether or not you should even appeal a particular entry. I think Rick mentioned, there's clients out there that don't appeal because of the challenge. It's just not an easy process.
Yeah, Michael, your description of the problem reminded me of a conversation I had about 6 months ago with another lawyer, where he summarized it this way. He said, "I spend more time lawyering my bills than I do providing advice to my clients," and that's of no value to anyone, right? Which again is why I think of this as a crisis. If lawyers are spending more time with the bills than the legal work, that's not good for the client. And yet the client's the one that's imposed the risk or the burden on the firm. I've also spoken to a lot of lawyers that have said, "I really enjoy the work I'm doing for this client, but I just can't do it anymore. We're not getting paid. And we're in a business and we need to get paid." And so if firms are choosing not to represent clients because of the burden of the billing process, that's also terrible, right? Terrible in terms of how lawyers are thinking about their clients and how their clients are thinking about their lawyers. And there is no easy solution per se, other than, again, get the bill right at the beginning and then be able to understand why you haven't gotten paid. And if there's a valid reason, then object to it and get paid for it. But as with anything in a law firm, the volume is the crippling activity, right? There's, it's one thing to say, well, okay, where they rejected an item, let's modify the description or give them a document that explains why we build it that way. But in most cases, firms are having to do that hundreds and thousands of times, and there's just no ability to do that, as you've said, particularly from the lawyers.
Yeah, good point.
Rick, there's always going to be, I mean, even if you identify it as easily as you can, and you bill at the highest quality level that you can. There's still going to be differences of opinion. There's still going to be appeals, or there probably should be appeals. But Michael talked about how complicated it was, and how complicated that was, and how time consuming that is. So, you have a solution for that?
Yeah. I mean, continue to work on compliance, right? Continue to perfect the bill going into it. And I would say that's the exercise that firms have been doing for decades, whether there was e-billing involved or not, right? Get the bill right and you'll get paid for it. But even when you think you've gotten the bill right, there's going to be some questions, right? We're dealing with a lot of money. We're dealing with the billable hour, which we could spend a whole another session just on the billable hour concepts, right? But there has to be an actionable way to determine where the problem is and an ability to fix it. And that can't be done by looking at every bill or going back to the file, right? It's a matter of getting a clear understanding of why it's been rejected. So again, I go back to personal utilization or personal use, right? We all get billed for things, and I'm sure none of us pay those bills in full 100% of the time. But when we don't, we have to explain why we haven't paid it in full. Now, the e-billing systems would say that they do that. They tell you why it hasn't been paid in full, and they give you an opportunity to appeal it, resubmit it, justify it, so on and so forth. But again, it's very difficult to find that information, and then it's very difficult to submit the information. And even when you appeal something, you're left in the dark in terms of whether it's been approved or not approved. And if it's not approved, there's no further reasons as to why your appeal failed. Some firms look at it as in the manner of saying, well, it's going to take us X amount of time to do the appeal, and yet what we're appealing doesn't rise to the value level to make it worth appealing. And so, they don't take any action. So if you make it easier to find the data, make it easier to solve the problem, it reduces the cost associated with prosecuting the appeals, and therefore it's something that every firm should be doing. Now, we've approached that using technology, right? Because again, we're dealing with such extensive volume, such massive volume of entries, that the only way you can do it is to use algorithms to find the data that you're looking for, and then take action on that data in a streamlined manner, in a workflow, right?
So good. So we have a couple minutes for audience questions. We do have one that I want to pose. Really came in from Michael. You mentioned that ScanLogic's products are fantastic, but you didn't talk. But our attendee was wondering about the experience. What's it like working with their team?
That's a great question. I remember a meeting I had. Well, the first meeting I had with Rick, I remember very well, and I'm sure he does as well, where we had a conversation. He said, I can do these 3 or 4 things for your law firm. And I said, I don't believe you. But if you can, you have my business. And ultimately, we went through testing phase, and ultimately he did get our business. So he was very confident in what he said he could deliver, and I was less confident, but he did deliver that. But second, it's a great question, because I've never had this type of experience working with a technology company before, in that, we buy a lot of technology. We're a large firm. We've got 50 attorneys. We represent the entire state of Florida. So we do buy a lot of technology. And I'll never forget this, in that we were on a call with Rick and some of the other team. And I remember specifically one of the developers, Navlock, and we were on this call, and we speak to him quite frequently. So I remember him, and we chat. But I was making commentary on the particular layout of a report that they had generated for us. And I said, oh, well, this column should look like this, and this column should be there, and you should just reorganize it. Like for me, as the end user, it just didn't display right. It wasn't a big deal. The information was all there. It just wasn't organized the way I would want it organized. And we keep on talking and talking and talking, and then maybe a few minutes later, and it really wasn't that long a conversation. A few minutes later, Navlock's like, hey, Michael, just hit refresh on your screen. And on my screen, the comments that I had made were done in real time. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a coder. I don't know anything about the back end of like how to make, I mean, I know how to use Excel. I'm not, sort of making a joke. This wasn't like an Excel report, but that's the only thing I can analogize it to. Certainly I can organize columns in Excel, but Navlock changed that entire report in, I don't know, I'll say 5 minutes, a matter of minutes, in real time based upon my feedback. Now, that's what I wanted. And I don't know if they made that change for all their users. It was just for us. I really don't know. But I've never had a call with a vendor where I've given them feedback, and not only did they take the feedback to heart and like go in and make the change. Sometimes vendors do. Some vendors don't. They're like, this is the way the product is, take it or leave it. But I've never had a call with a vendor where they're like, yeah, we like your feedback so much that we're going to do it in real time for you, and we're gonna deliver that result before the call ever ended. I've never seen anything like that. I've never had that experience before. But I can tell you, from day one, they really have gone above and beyond. The reporting, the communication. I mean, maybe fortunately or unfortunately, we email a lot on the weekends or after hours. I don't think that's a requirement that they're like working those hours. I know they have some people that work in different time zones, so it does make it a little bit more easier. But that's when I email. I normally do my emails early in the morning or late at night, and sometimes there's somebody responding, but they're what I'll call customer service, for lack of a better term, is just I don't know, above and beyond is what I would call
it. Thank you for that. We work hard at it, and it's a cultural issue, right? If I learned, I mean, so it's 40 plus years in legal tech, 20 years on the law firm side, and if having been in a law firm, you understand the pressure that everyone in that firm is under. And I always tell our team at every company I've built in legal tech, I always tell our team that our clients aren't calling to say hello. And they're generally not calling to tell you a problem that they haven't thought about or tried to fix themselves. They're calling because they have a problem, they need a resolution, and they need it quickly. And so at the heart of everything we do at ScanLogic is the client, the customer, and what their needs, what their requirements are. And like lawyers, we don't quite measure things in 6-minute increments, but we certainly measure things by the hour and at most by the day, right? We look in terms of what commitments have we made that need to be done today, and what do we need to do to honor those commitments. And if we can't honor those commitments, we have to have an open and honest conversation with our clients so that they in turn can take that information and make their business decisions and keep moving on. That's the only way to be successful in legal tech, is listen to the clients, build something that works for them, and be incredibly responsive to them, because it's a busy world, right? It's a busy world, and time is measured in money. So thank you so much for that compliment, Michael. Really appreciate that. And I know the team will appreciate that as well.
Of course. It's the truth.
Well, and we're at the end of our time. So thank you, Rick, for your time today. And thank you, Michael, for your time today. And both of you for your insights. And, I find it interesting that this is a really big problem that is just depressing the profitability at so many firms. And there just hasn't been a prioritized solution to it for so long. So I think we're heading for some exciting times and some good times for some law firms. So thank you both, and thank you, audience members, for joining us today. And everybody have a great day.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Yep.
See y'all. Thanks,
Thank
Michael.
You.
Bye.
Of course.